ask you, first of all, to explain the concept of a Zionist, because that's a word that's used, and I think a lot of people perhaps don't necessarily understand what it means.
It has a very simple explanation. I mean, Zionism is the belief in Jewish self-determination in a homeland, which is in where the state of Israel is. So a Zionist is somebody who believes in that. Now, I think the problem is that many people use Zionists when in fact they mean Jews. And that was what we felt Jeremy Corbyn was doing in this 2013 video, because it is true that if you poll the Jewish community, over 90% of them will associate support for the state of Israel or Zionism as being central to their Jewish identity. Not everybody, but on the left, it is a very lazy way of insulting a community by describing people as Zionists when in fact they mean Jews. And that is sort of quite old-fashioned racism as we believe it.
And in essence, what this is all about is that Jeremy Corbyn has had a long-held belief of support of the Palestinians, and he is unable to criticise or indeed to to undermine the argument from that side that in some shape or form Israel has a right to exist. I mean, he'll begrudgingly agree that maybe Israel can exist, but in terms of who is creating the tension between, he has a long-held belief. And also, I suppose, as somebody who's Jewish, there are lots of Jewish people who will not support what the Jewish state is doing under a particular government. But that's not what Jeremy Corbyn is doing, is it?
Not at all. He wasn't talking about the policies of the Israeli government, past or present. He was making a blanket statement that suggested that he regards Zionists, by which he could well have meant Jews, as being somehow foreign, as somehow not being British. And it is ironic because he said that 5 years ago, but now he's the leader of a party that is dedicated to tackling, so they say, anti-Semitism. And yet if that is what he thinks and believes, that he believes that somehow we, our community, are less British essentially than he is, then how could he lead a party and eliminate the anti-Semitism that we're seeing?
And I think what we're really beginning to get to here is an understanding as to exactly why this is a significant problem and why so many people across the Jewish community have an issue. And this is many people who have voted Labour. I am not a Labour supporter or a Labour voter or a Labour Party member. That having been said, I do understand why people might say, oh, you're just having a go at him politically. There are many people that I know who have supported Labour, who have given money to Labour, who have a real problem with this. And this comes down to, it's not having a go. If Jeremy Corbyn was having a go at the policies of Israel, that is fine. Mm-hmm. As soon as you start to identify a group, and I read this and I couldn't believe that he'd said it. So accusing British Zionists of having no sense of English irony, and then saying they needed 2 lessons which we could perhaps help them with. I'm not sure we need any help from Jeremy Corbyn on any lessons on how to be British.
Well, that type of language belongs in the 1930s in Germany. The fact that we are a separate group, we're not British, and that we need teaching lessons. I entirely agree with you. I'm 51 years old. I'm nearly 52. I've been British all my life. I'm very, very proud of my British heritage and my Jewish faith. But what you've got here is a leader of a party who simply cannot say that he wants to eliminate anti-Semitism when he so lazily throws around the word Zionist when in fact he means Jews, when he continues to accuse Jewish people of not being sufficiently loyal to the country. Here he is saying that they're not sufficiently British. And it's not just Jewish people who are offended by this. If Jeremy Corbyn was a decent, competent leader, he would have dealt with this issue months and months ago. But he hasn't. And that's why throughout this summer we have had this drip of stories. And this incident happened less than 5 years ago when he was a member of Parliament. He was not some wet behind the ears novice MP.
He knows what he's doing, doesn't he?
He does. And he's been in Parliament for 25 years when he says this. 2 years after this, he's elected leader of the Labour Party. When he says Zionists, he means Jews. When he says that they need to be taught a lesson, that's exactly what he means.
OK, so should he be removed from his position as leader of the Labour Party?
Look, whoever is leader of the party is a matter for the members of the Labour Party. What I think people are looking at is the competence of Jeremy Corbyn. He clearly has not been able to deal with this issue. He's not been able to kill the idea that his party is riddled with anti-Semitism. And
but that's because he is.
Well, that's because he has not taken the firm, decisive action that any leader of the party who was determined to stamp this out would have taken. And that's That's the problem. So whether he is or not, and I believe that he has a very narrow interpretation of anti-Semitism, he simply cannot see that statements like this are easily taken as being anti-Semitic. And it is ironic. You have to ask, how can the party truly deal with anti-Semitism when its leader holds these views, is not competent enough to deal with the problem, and is not prepared to take the steps necessary to distance himself from what he said and believed in the past?
Why is this an issue to anybody in the country who is outside of the Jewish community?
Well, because if this is the Labour Party has always been the party that's been committed to equality, to social justice, to fairness. If they have a blind spot towards a particular part of society, and this happens to be the Jews, then who's to say that they do not or will not have a similar blind spot to any other part of society? If a party that is dedicated to being a fairer, gentler form of politics is actually engaging in thuggery, in racism, in anti-Semitism, then how on earth can anybody have trust that they are committed to what they say that they are?
And arguably, I mean, their slogan, which they say, which I already think is rather discriminatory, because I think any party that says that it's there for the general populace and then says for the many, not the few, it really does stand at the moment, if Jeremy Corbyn is of this belief, for the many, not the Jew.
Well, that was something on a slogan when we on a placard when we brought 2,000 people out into Parliament Square in April. If the party is genuinely committed to full equality, then its leader needs to fully distance himself from these appalling views that he gave in the past of somehow suggesting that Jewish people are not sufficiently British and need teaching the type of lesson that only he, with his beliefs, is capable of teaching us.
So where do we go from here? Because it's very clear that he has absolutely no intention of adopting the full international definition of what anti-Semitism is, because it is clear through not just one or two, through a pattern of behaviour consistent throughout his political life. And I take my hat off to him to the fact that he has at least been consistent, but he has been consistently, in my opinion, anti-Semitic throughout that, because he groups together people, as you say, with his Zionist taunts and groups, and puts Jewish people together with, for example, he has a real problem because of his political views with people who are commercially successful, as seen in the past of, him thinking that the Jewish bankers, which is another a sort of trait, particularly of the far left, that, all Jewish people are Jewish bankers. They'll talk about Goldman Sachs, they'll talk about this, and then it goes on that this becomes a narrative for all.
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the things that started this off was this mural in East London, which depicted Jewish bankers around a Monopoly table playing Monopoly on the back of poor people. Now, Jeremy Corbyn did not see that as anti-Semitic, and that's because his worldview is essentially anti-capitalist, it's anti-colonialist. He believes that the creation of Israel as a state was an act of colonial aggression, and so he cannot see how broad anti-Semitism is, and therefore when it comes in the broader Labour movement, he doesn't condemn it, he doesn't distance himself from what's happened in the past. So where we go from here is, at the minimum, the Labour Party has to adopt the full international definition of anti-Semitism, but then the leader must clearly, in his own words, with his own voice, absolutely commit himself, his party and all of his followers to completely eliminate anti-Semitism, which means that, for example, when Dame Margaret Hodge, a Jewish Labour MP, comes out and criticises the Labour leadership, he needs to stop his supporters from engaging in the type of vile, misogynistic, anti-Semitic, racist abuse that she is then subject to.
Absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for not only coming into the studio, but also explaining so clearly why this is still a very significant issue that needs to be tackled, and why people who are not Jewish, and I admit that, I am, so therefore I might have a particular view, but I think why it's so important outside of those who are Jewish to understand why this is a continuing issue and needs to be acted upon. Simon Johnson.